by Rachel Bernard, who is director. Previously, we had conversations about consulting, public humanities, and global policymaking. And today we'll be talking about healthcare communications with Nidhi Ruy, who graduated from GSAS Department of Biological Sciences in 2010. And I'll just, Nidhi, do you mind introducing yourself briefly to our group here today?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining and thanks for having me. I'm Nidhi Ruy. I graduated from Biological Sciences in 2010. I was a joint student between Dr. Brent Stockwell and Dr. Stuart Firestein. After my PhD, I did continue in the academic track. I did a short postdoc at the Rockefeller, short actually meaning like, 2.5 years. Where that felt short with, some postdocs in that lab there, like 10 plus years, still wondering what to do after. And then I was introduced to, as I was leaving the lab, someone brought up the concept or idea or like introduced me to medical writing as a field. And, I had always been interested in writing and communication. But I didn't really see it as like, something I could do. I wasn't like a science blogger or, I didn't have like journalistic training. But then when I kind of learned more about this, I was like, oh, this is great. I can be in communication and in science at the same time. So I started working for a healthcare communications company in Soho in, I think, 2013. I was there for a couple of years. I had a child while I was there, like after about 1.5 years. And I went back to work briefly. I did not feel like I could stay there much longer. But fortunately, I found another position in the same industry that has been, challenging, of course, but manageable. And I have been at this current company for 5.5 years. I'm a senior vice president of what do we actually call it? Medical and Scientific Affairs at Synapse Medical Communications. Yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
Oops, thank you for that introduction. So yeah, why don't we go around the room and that we have a couple of questions and Rachel will be recording. If you prefer not to be on screen, although we're going to be doing speaker view, you can turn off your camera for now, rename yourself. Yeah, so my first question is, which of course I'm sorry, I put these, and then I had to restart my computer. Okay, well, my first question is, tell me a little bit about your current role at Synapse as Vice President of Medical and Science Affairs.
Sure, so, it's kind of a mix of whatever is on my plate for that day, but overall, the function of the job in medical communications is to create educational materials for physicians to educate their peers on behalf of pharmaceutical companies. So, if our clients are the marketing teams of pharmaceutical companies and you could say it's a form of advertising, but an educational form of advertising, because you could imagine that just like if you are, trying to sell Pepsi, you want people to be like, yay, I know what that tastes like, I want to buy it. But with medicines, it's a little bit different. If you want a physician to prescribe it, they don't just need to know, what the box looks like, but and like a tagline, like that's the kind of like medical advertising that you see on TV commercials that are more like, happy patients in a field or, interacting with their family. But that might convince a patient, oh, I might have this condition, I should ask my doctor about it. But really it's the physicians that are making the prescribing decisions. In order to do that, they need to know the data for that product, and they need to know how it compares to the medications that they've been previously using in that disease state. They need to know what the patient population looks like that would be appropriate for that medicine. And if you think about it, physicians are very busy. They're seeing patients all day. They're very burdened, appointment to appointment. They have all the paperwork, they're running the office, the hospital requirements, whatever their setting is. And they're going to do things the way they're comfortable and familiar doing them. And they may or may not have time to keep up with the latest research. I mean, we work with physicians in my line of work all the time, and they seem so informed. They present at congresses. They are involved as clinical researchers in trials, and they really keep up with it because that's kind of the academic role that they're in. But if you think about a community practicing physician that isn't making it to these medical congresses, that just like day in and day out seeing patients all day, every day, they're not going to have that time. So, we develop these educational materials that they would maybe go to a dinner program in their community and hear from another physician. Or maybe if they do attend a Congress, like we would have like a larger event there, but there's still like a slide set that a physician will present. Or maybe something comes to them in the mail and they're not going to read it if it looks like the package insert. If you've ever, gotten a prescription for yourself, there's always something called the package insert in there, which is all of the, the pivotal trial information, the contraindications, the indications, the safety that, the FDA has really carefully taken a look at in order to approve that medication. But it's this fine, really tiny folded up black and white piece of paper. And you probably don't even look at it. I mean, even doing this, I never do for any medication that I've taken. So I think that the last thing that physicians want to do is read through that fine print and not just for one drug, but for every drug, and compare and decide which is different and better and new for their patients. So instead we, kind of distill out the key points and messages on graphs really, or short talking points to convey what it is that they need to talk to their patients about, what it is they need to look for, what would make them feel comfortable with the safety, what they should be concerned about, et cetera, in order to use that medication. So yeah, we're looking at all of these things in careful detail, and then turning them into something that someone can quickly look at and digest and get that information.
Great. And that kind of reminding me of our conversation previously. We're talking about like communications, making something that might be really complicated to something that's easily digestible, easy to understand. Great. And so I think I was looking back at my notes, and something I kind of took away from our conversation, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more. But my second question was, so what was your first job after graduate school?
So right away after, I did do a postdoc. I mean, I was very uncertain. I mean, I think that there's a lot of grad students. There's probably like two extremes of like, I 100% know I do not want to stay in academia, and I 100% know that I must do anything I possibly can. I want to be a professor. This is my track. This is my calling. This is why I came to grad school from the start. And then there's the probably majority that's like somewhere in the middle of that, of like, I'm here because I'm interested and I like what I've been learning about, but I either I'm not sure I could see myself doing this forever. There are aspects that I like about it. There are aspects that I know I'm not gonna want to do. There is like the idea that, for every graduate student trained, there's a small proportion of that number of faculty positions. The role of, those faculty and higher education overall may be changing rapidly, or at least in the future at some point. So who's to say that it even is what it was when you planned that career goal? So I mean, when I did graduate, what I did know is I like doing the research. I'm interested in what I'm doing now. I mean, there's a handful of labs that I would be interested in continuing to do research in. So, you know, I'll send letters to a handful of PIs and see what the opportunities are. And I had actually worked at the Rockefeller right after college as a research assistant. So I knew it was like, just, you know, like a wonderful academic, you know, high science environment that you're really surrounded by, you know, top research and great lectures and a nice campus, good funding. So I went there, and you know, it was still in New York City, which I wanted to stay, and it was great. I mean, I enjoyed doing a postdoc. It's much similar to, you know, what you're used to. It wasn't like a big like culture shock or a learning curve. I mean, of course, it's always a learning curve, and in an academic setting, you're always, you know, constantly reading and learning new things and learning new lab techniques. So I thought it was a great, like what could be better? It's your job, and you just get to, you know, have all this equipment and order whatever reagents you need and freely explore and not really have, you know, deadlines or requirements or anyone telling you what to do and when to do it on a daily basis. But then at the same time, it's kind of like, well, what's this leading to? Like, what are the other people around me doing? Am I going to do this forever? Is it really a career? Or is it kind of like an extent, like you already have your degree? Like when you're doing your PhD, you're kind of like, well, even during the most difficult time, I think that probably everyone during their PhD has a point where you're like, am I going to keep doing this? Can I keep doing this? Like, I don't know what to do next. Like, nothing's working. Like, what do I, but you're like, well, it would just be a waste if I left here without a degree. But once you're a postdoc, you're kind of like, oh, well, every bit of experience I get out of this is more experience. It's not like, I mean, maybe you're going for I'm not going to leave until I get this publication, or I'm not going to leave until I get blah, blah, blah. But I mean, at the same time, the lab was having, it wasn't a well-established HHMI lab, yet it was still having funding issues. And it just kind of, and at the same time, I started being involved in other organizations. Like, I mean, I feel like there's just always like the second guessing of yourself, like, oh, am I going to be able to, you know, get a publication to this caliber or get a faculty position? But you look around and you're like, I'm at a place that has, whether it's Columbia or Rockefeller, or you're like, I'm at a place that has like the top researchers in the world, and they've been here for 10 years, or there's no requirement of how they manage their lab such that they could have, you know, such a well-established structure yet still be having like grant issues. So it just kind of, but not only that, but being involved in, what was it? There was, it was called the incubator. There was someone amongst the postdoc community that started a blog, and just kind of the people that I met through that, it seemed like we were all going through the same thought process of like, what else am I interested in? What else could I do? And like, so while the research itself was interesting, I mean, it kind of took that like community mindset of like, you know, let me talk to other people and see what ideas there are of what else to do. And then I, you know, just someone happened to mention this pathway in medical communications. And I was like, oh, great. How do I start doing that? And that's why I like kind of like following your interests and networking with people that you have common interests with, like inevitably will get you to someone who says, oh, hey, I know someone from my lab that went and did that. You should talk to her. And then you do, and then, you know, opportunities follow. So it's kind of where that went.
Yeah, the importance of networking and finding out, because there might not be opportunities that you're just aware of or in your periphery even. So talking to others, that's something that Rachel and I always stress in our appointments with students. And so what would you say, or like what experience or experiences in graduate school best prepared you for your current career path?
Well, so like I think it was Anna, right? You're in, or Carla, your position's on the screen switched. In Brent Stockwell's lab, it's a chemical biology lab. So it's kind of like more discovery-based research as opposed to like traditional hypothesis-based research. I mean, of course, you're making informed designs to the discovery, but I never really felt like it was a standard PhD where it's like, oh, I'm trying to understand the role of this protein in this pathway. It was more like, I'm trying to figure out what's happening in this process. And I'm kind of searching for, like, it's a little bit, it's like you find a compound that's doing something, and then you do all of these, you try and decide what different techniques you're going to do to figure out how and why, and like kind of narrow it down. And so it was very much like, oh, now I need to like find a different way to look at this. Now I need to like look at a new technique. And so it was, I mean, I guess every PhD is a problem solving kind of journey. But I feel like it was almost more so in that way because it was a little bit of like a backwards discovery of like, this is happening. Let me, kind of be an investigator to figure out how it's happening. But really just like the problem solving skills of it, that it's not like anyone will ever tell you what to do. Like, a client can give us an assignment or like a request for a certain project, but figuring out the steps and the details and like the best way to go about it. Like there's no set, like, I mean, even as an agency, they're always trying to establish set processes. But I just think that like, which is good. I mean, obviously you need to have an overall standard to your process, but it's always going to require thinking, and like things can be done more efficiently if you think about it like step by step, and instead of trying to hammer something into like a general framework to look at the actual pieces and just like apply that logic to whatever you do. And I mean, doing a PhD and reading like mechanistic literature is really like high altitude training for anything else that you have to do, because like the understanding of like the details is just like, it's almost like you learn during that PhD, like that whether it's in science or humanities, I think that there's a lot of like technical reading and deciphering and level of understanding that you get to in your subject matter that you just become accustomed to that level of detailed thought that you don't even realize that was like a real mental challenge almost. So then like after having done that, it's just like everything's like, oh, okay, I can handle this. I can read this and take it apart and figure out what needs to be done. And you kind of feel like the things that you read about and learn about are so like specific during grad school, but that process of taking something dense and detailed and kind of breaking it down into its parts and understanding it and then being able to decipher and apply it is just so applicable to anything that you would do in the future.
Great. Yeah. And those skills, I mean, that's something that we often talk about, the transferable skills, kind of that, high mental kind of breaking down problems into small components. Yeah, again, something that we often hear PhD graduates say is kind of one of the best things I took away. But, I'm wondering, was there anything that you had wished you had done in graduate school to prepare you for your current career?
I don't know, not real. I mean, it's kind of like during it, I always had this feeling of like, oh, they actually allow you as a graduate student to take or audit any course in any, department that Columbia offers. And that just seemed like such an amazing opportunity that it feels like, oh, there was one student that overlapped a couple of years junior to me who did a law degree during his PhD in it. And overall, I audited one course, meaning like, I barely went to the lectures when I had time because I knew I didn't need the grade. But it was health law. And I do actually remember back to really interesting tidbits of knowledge that I got, but it just seemed like, you have access to every professor in every department at Columbia University. Like you really should be doing more or learning more. But but then you kind of have to say there's only so much you can do, and doing a PhD is a lot. So shouldn't feel badly about that. But, and even I think there are things while I was there that I felt like I should be doing more of, but then looking back, I was like, I got so much out of it that I wasn't even realizing that I was getting during it. Like these transferable skills that you almost don't realize that you have because they're just part of you until you then go on and transfer them and use them in something else. Because the other thing that I always felt like near the end that I was kicking myself for not doing was networking more, because I always, you always go to career symposiums and they tell you should be networking. And I just always thought of that as going around and introducing myself to a stranger and handing out business cards, things that just don't come naturally and don't feel normal to me. But then I realized oh, the fact that, I quickly got the name of someone else from someone else to find a job means I was networking. And that just meant having friends and going to happy hour and knowing people that know other people and attending seminars where you catch tidbits of information and know who to send an email to. But then I think the thing is, you just have to, when the time comes to need to, you just have to feel comfortable sending that email and knowing that people are happy to respond to those emails. Because I am now. I may not immediately, but I always if a student, whether it's from my undergrad or even my high school or from Columbia or, someone random that just found me on LinkedIn, I will, respond, because it can, having that network always helps you in both directions, whether it's to find a job yourself or to find an employee or even, to connect to people that are unrelated to working with you at all. It just kind of feels satisfying or something. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's often the question I get is, why would anyone respond to my email to ask for an informational interview? And I think you kind of just answered that question. It's you remember you did the same. You like to kind of give back and to make new connections yourself. So yeah, thank you for kind of just bringing that up. And I'm sure we could talk forever, but I do want to make sure that we answer students' questions too. But the one question I'd like to ask before maybe we open it up to students is, what current advice do you have for maybe PhD students who are nearing graduation or, a year or two from here? What some general advice you could just give them?
To do what you're interested in and don't feel like there's a set path or a path that once you go down, you can't go back. I feel like people used to ask the question oh, if I want to do this, should I do a postdoc first? And I never feel like the answer is yes, that will get this step will get you to that next step. If you're interested in doing a postdoc, you should do a postdoc because you can always learn something from it, but you should never but you could probably also do that next step without doing it, or you could do a different next step. If you're not interested in doing a postdoc, why would you think you might be interested in that step that a postdoc gets you to? I think that you should always do what you're interested in, and that will kind of, create or your next step may emerge to you through continuing to do what you're interested in, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think so. And
Maybe don't worry so much about mapping out the next 5 to 10 years. Just continue to, at every step, do what you're interested in at that time and what you're interested in next. And that will kind of guide your next steps, because, 5 or 10 years from now, the things to do may be different from what they are now. So.
Yeah, and I think that, and like, was there something that kind of drove you and your interests, Nidhi, to kind of that next thing, to leave academia? Like, what was that for you?
I mean, I think it was like a convergence of those things that I was like kind of having in my head during the postdoc, like the fun, like, I mean, the issue of the lab probably running out of funding, like, oh, I better find something before I'm forced to find something. And then like talking to other people through the postdoc association and through the science blog that was going on, and then hearing about medical communications and realizing that there was a career path there, as opposed to just like wanting to be a science journalist that wouldn't necessarily have a stable career out of it. Although, I mean, I'm sure that would be interesting, but also feeling like there was something that I had a specific skill set to be able to do, as opposed to like, well, who can't write and have opinions, like, but being able to be like, oh, there's something that I'm like technically able to like add some value to. So maybe a convergence of those kind of ideas.
So, and it was the communication skill that you felt like maybe you excelled in above others?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess it's usually the taking two things. It's like there's a lot of people that know science, and there's a lot of people that have writing skills, or communication skills, but to put them together, then it becomes like more and more of like a unique set of skills or expertise. So I think that's also why I would encourage people to like follow all of their interests, because you might not even think of either of those things as a skill. You might just think of it as like, well, everyone talks so we can all communicate, but there's I don't know, I'm having trouble communicating right now. But it's almost like you see yourself doing it, and then you realize that it's a thing, and that it's interesting too, like, because I mean, I feel like there was a lot of career path discussions on consultant or healthcare consulting, or just consulting in general. And there are a lot of things that you can do because you have a PhD in any field, but it was meaningful to me, I think, to even if I'm not doing bench research and basic molecular biology, to feel like the field that I went into had like a direct connection to science, because then I feel like I've entirely done something different, but that there's that, every once in a while there's like a more high science project that's not just like looking at did the patient not respond, like, binary data, but more like, oh, this is getting back into like a molecular pathway that's interesting, and it feels like very familiar. And so there's that nice connection, that it's not just like communicating something in general, but that it's related to science and medicine.
Yeah. And so there was like a natural progression there. Something that I also kind of maybe just want to bring up from our previous conversation too, is this idea of successful communication, and like how sometimes there were people who would like use all these specific terms, and you felt like maybe you weren't following them, but really what you found was they just weren't effective communicators. And they weren't kind of like breaking it down into ways that other people could understand. And so, yeah, it's just something I wanted to kind of bring back into the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that from grad school, feeling like, oh, this person is really great to hear a lecture, and this person seems so smart, but I can't understand anything they're saying. It's always just like going over my head, or I need to be paying attention better, or I need to like, be focused in order to like understand this other field or something. But really it's on the speaker to both communicate at the level of that audience. So if the audience is only your lab, you would speak in one way. If the audience is only your department, it would be different. And if the audience was, an entire, university community, it'd be different. If it's patients, if it's physicians, it should always be tailored to that group, both at the level that you're explaining things, but also it's on the speaker to engage and keep the interest of the audience too. So if you're designing a presentation, it should start with, a draw and a kind of like broader impact of like why the audience should listen. And then the progression of the more detailed information should, follow step by step in a way that people can follow, because often in your research, you're so close to it that it's going to make sense to you in any order. And that's also why it takes effort, because it might take like reviewing it with someone outside of yourself, meaning doing it in advance in order to give yourself that time to practice, do a practice talk, get some feedback, because you say something too many times and you're not going to be able to know anymore if someone else is going to get it. So, but just like going back to those professors that seem really good at it and really like over everyone's head with it, I think that the ones that were really good at it really took it seriously and cared about being great lecturers to undergrads, great mentors to their grad students, and, organized in the way they run their lab and efficient in their meetings and in the way they train people. And yeah, those things really matter, I think, to the development of the people that they're training. So.
And good things to look out for people to gain or to add to your network too. Like if you find that person, stay in contact with them. Exactly.
And yeah, one thing that I remember my PhD advisors both said to me early on during, what do you call it? Like after your second year or so, when you give, it's like your preview to your dissertation. I can't remember what they call it. Maybe it's called your qualifying exam. Mm-hmm. And they said something like, you always think of yourself as, a student. They're professors. They're like senior to you. Like you're all like, even when you graduate, they're always going to be. But they said something like, we're really training our future colleagues, and in this subject matter, you're going to investigate in a way where you'll be that. Like it's like we're overseeing the lab, but like this piece of it is your area of expertise. So you're the one that has to own it. And like just that idea of like being a future colleague of someone. I mean, obviously I didn't stay in academia and become a professor, but I think that's like the right way to see like any level of mentorship, that you're not like just having someone junior to you to hand work out to. Like they should always take ownership of it and bring their own ideas to it, to develop into, whatever level they aspire to be, or, to be. You want people to like have their own ideas as a colleague, as opposed to like having like a directional relationship, regardless of position. So.
Yeah, and I've also heard like calling your professors by their first name can also kind of establish that more level playing field. I don't know if you've ever done that. But so let's open it up to questions now.